What happens to your love life when your outsides don't match your insides? Is feminism the kiss of death for romance? Can a woman be independent and still find the man of her dreams? Believe it or not, women were already grappling with these questions over 100 years ago. Come along with me as I explore how our great-grandmothers of the silver screen navigated the stormy waters of self-determination in the dating scene of the Roaring Twenties. Hi, welcome back to 100 Years of Romance, a decade-by-decade look at sex, love, and romance on the silver screen. This is Cinema Rolls, your go-to channel for movie comparisons, and I'm your host, Basha. In part 1 of this episode, Flappers in Love, we looked at some romantic comedies from the 1920s. If you haven't already seen it, you can catch up by clicking on the link in the description. In this video, we're going to look at some of the romance movies that I call cautionary tales because they seem to be pushing back against the newfound freedoms that women were enjoying after having entered the workforce during World War I, winning the vote in 1920, and gaining wider access to birth control. In stark contrast to the light fluffiness of the romantic comedies, the flappers and the cautionary tales tackle some tough issues with a gritty realism that isn't usually associated with the silent era. But that doesn't mean it was all doom and gloom. As you would expect, the romances usually begin with a little flirting, and the women in these movies are usually a bit older and more mature than in the romantic comedies, and they're much more daring and assertive in their flirtations. It sometimes starts with eyes meeting from across a crowded room. Or eyes meeting from a bit closer up. Flirting with the other parts of the feminine anatomy can sometimes be unintentional. Or not. Things can get pretty steamy on the dance floor, too. But when there's competition, that's when a girl's got to pull out all the stops. And things aren't always as they seem. Gold-digging Anne wrangles an introduction to billionaire Ben by pretending to be all sugar and spice, while Diana retaliates by ramping up her faux party girl persona, and teasing and kissing are all part of the come-on. But once they've taken the bait, it's the men who take control of the kisses. Those were mostly getting-to-know-you kisses, but in Manhandled, Tessie and Jimmy are already in a relationship, and you can tell it's a good one. There's a lot more sexual innuendo in these cautionary tales than in the romantic comedies, but still nothing very explicit. The directors sometimes use clever cinematic devices to get the idea across, like using a fireplace to show things heating up, and a fade to black to leave the rest to your imagination. And even the provocatively flirtatious Diana stops things before they go too far. At the same time, her wide-eyed competitor plays the innocent and expresses bewilderment at women who are daring and free with their love, adding that she's not a modern. Of course, not all our protagonists are out to get a man. Sometimes the man is out to get them. And sometimes they go to great lengths. I think that fade out tells us his efforts paid off. Not all of the sex and smooching is consensual, however, but unlike the romantic comedies, the disturbing message in these cautionary tales almost seems to be that women are responsible for what happens to them. In the 1929 film The Wild Party, Stella's used to fending off unwanted advances from frat boys, but she has to use her wits when things get out of hand at a local bar that she and her friends are visiting dressed only in their sequin swimsuits under their mink coats. And when things escalate and she's abducted and about to be gang raped, she has to use her feminine wiles to distract her abductor so she can make her get away. In Manhandled, the introductory title card makes the film's message very clear. Tessie is used to being jostled and gawked at on the subway. But when she tells Jimmy that she's going to pose for an artist, he makes a point about playing with fire. She ignores his advice and soon gets burned. And when the artist's neighbor comes to the rescue, it doesn't take long before he's manhandling her too. She thinks she's finally safe when she meets up with her old boss who offers her a lift, but when she resists his advances, he tells her she shouldn't be so particular after all the others, as if once you've been with one man, that gives every other man the right to do whatever they want with you, right? And I seem to remember that 50 years later in the 70s and into the 80s, that was still the prevailing attitude. I wonder what it's like today. If you're a woman who's still in the dating game, what's your experience? Let me know in the comments. The next two movies, The Sheik and The Merry Widow, both deal with women traveling alone. In The Merry Widow, as we saw earlier, there's an implicit message that Western women are seen as racy by men in faraway countries, and the mere act of traveling without a mate can leave the wrong impression. And if her work clothes reveal more than the local women are showing, that just adds fuel to the fire. So, of course, she shouldn't be surprised when they assume they can take liberties with her. But when they gang up on her from both sides, a woman's got to use her noggin. This theme is repeated in the 1921 film The Sheik, starring Rudolph Valentino and Agnes Ayres, but with more serious consequences. Now you might be wondering why I included The Sheik among the Flapper movies, because she doesn't really dress the part, but it's that independent, self-reliant attitude that I think makes her fit right in. Lady Diana sets off on a safari through the desert, leaving her devoted fiancé behind, but along the way she's abducted by the charming sheik she'd met the night before in Bisra. When she realizes why he's brought her there, she tries to escape, but to no avail. In this scene, it's clear from her tears and from the sheik's assurances to his English friend that she is content that she's been taken against her will. And still, after he proves his trust by giving her a gun for protection, she does fall in love with him. Maybe it's the small signs of how the sheik himself is changing once he understands that his behavior is causing her distress that begin to change her feelings for him. The breakups in the cautionary tales tend to be much more serious than in the romantic comedies and usually include very harsh judgments about the woman's character. In The Wild Party, when James breaks it off with Stella, he tells her he hates her for her cowardice, but he loves her for what she could become, making probably the fastest breakup in makeup in the history of cinema. But later on, she shows him she's grown up and is worthy of his love by finally taking responsibility for her actions. In Manhandled, Jimmy breaks it off with Tessie on the strength of a written dinner invitation and the fact that she's wearing new clothes, implying that all of that must be the result of her having been, as he puts it, manhandled. A broken-hearted Tessie, who is completely innocent, watches a scene of the wedded bliss that she had hoped to have with Jimmy. While she prays that he'll come to his senses, everything in his apartment reminds him of her, and he sets his pride aside. In Our Dancing Daughters, Ben has been struggling with his feelings for Diana and his wish to find a wife that he can trust. Her facade of the loose party girl hasn't done her any favors, but that's what she thinks men are looking for because, after all, it does grab their attention. Meanwhile, gold-digging Anna has been posing as the innocent ingenue. So when Diana arrives at a party just as Ben and Anne come in and announce their engagement, she is devastated. But it doesn't take long after the marriage for Anne's true colors to begin showing. Once Ben realizes his mistake, he professes his love to Diana, even though they can never be together. But Anne soon gets her comeuppance, freeing Ben and Diana to be together. In both Manhandled and Our Dancing Daughters, the implication seems to be that women who dress a certain way or show that they can live life to the fullest are just asking for trouble. In The Sheik, Lady Diana really discovers her feelings for Ahmed when she's abducted by bandits, and Ahmed comes to her rescue, taking a bullet in the process. He's severely wounded, but he pulls through with a tearful Diana at his side. And as an added bonus, while at his bedside, she finds out from his friend that he's not really an Arab, but half English and half French. And she seems visibly relieved. So I guess that makes him a more socially acceptable partner for her, because he wouldn't be otherwise. The plot of The Merry Widow takes a lot of twists and turns at a dizzying pace. When Danilo is prevented from attending his wedding with Sally because of his royal obligations, she marries the elderly Count Sidoja on the rebound. The Count dies on their wedding night before she has to go through the nuptials, leaving her millions. Danilo and Sally meet in Paris many years later, and he seems ready to pick up where they left off. But she thinks he's after her money, so she marries his creepy cousin, the Crown Prince Mirko, instead. When Danilo is injured in a duel with Mirko, she realizes he threw the duel for her happiness. When Mirko becomes king and is promptly assassinated, Danilo becomes king and promptly crowns Sally his queen, and they live happily ever after. I guess her millions changed the royal mindset about marrying beneath their station. The last two films I want to talk about are unique in that they compare and contrast two different types and how they fare in their love lives based on their upbringing and the privileges that they either enjoyed or were denied. The first is the 1925 film Lady of the Night, starring Norma Shearer as both heroines. Molly, a hooker with a heart whose mother died while her father was in prison, leaving her an orphan, and Florence, the equally motherless daughter of an influential banker. I think the device of using one actress for both parts really underscores the role of randomness in how our lives turn out. And as we're going to see in just a while, underneath the surface, both women really did have the same character. The second movie is the 1921 German film Die Bergkatze, or The Wildcat, starring Pola Negri as Rishka, the wild mountain-bred daughter of a leader of a gang of thieves, and Edith Meller as Lily, the daughter of a commandant in the army who lives in palatial quarters. In Lady of the Night, Molly has two men in her life: her steady, chunky Dunn, who she doesn't take seriously, and her neighbor David, an inventor who she's falling for and trying to romance with a spaghetti dinner. David arrives with the news that he's invented a device that can open any safe in the world, and when Chunky says that he knows some crooks that would pay a lot for it, Molly convinces David to do it straight and offer his inventions to a banker. Which he does, with the unintended outcome that David meets and is smitten by the banker's lovely daughter, Florence. In Die Bergkatze, Alexei, a lieutenant in the army, meets Rishka in a completely unexpected manner. And she soon falls in love with him. And Alexei, attracted by her refreshing earthiness compared to all the noble women who swoon at the mere mention of his name, falls for her as well. So, he isn't exactly thrilled when the commandant offers him the hand of his simpering daughter Lily in marriage. Although Chunky knows Molly likes David, he's doubtful about her chances and offers to marry her himself, but she doesn't take him very seriously. Rishka has a similar reaction when her father gets a volunteer to marry her. Molly is disheartened by David's obvious enthusiasm for the banker's daughter and spends the night praying that she will win his heart, while Florence does the same. Similarly, Rishka enjoys a lovely dream about Alexei. While Lily cries over him. Molly and Florence meet by accident in David's workshop, and in that brief moment, Florence can see that Molly is in love with David. After she leaves, Molly overhears David telling Florence, "Molly's a good pal, but I never loved her. And besides, Molly's in love with Chunky." Florence tells him that she loves him, but that Molly has the greater claim. Which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if David doesn't love Molly, then Molly doesn't really have any claim on David, does she? But it's a nice thought. Lily, on the other hand, isn't quite so magnanimous when she spies Rishka and Alexei having fun together in the palace. Later, Florence and Molly share a cab, and Florence says, "You'd marry him if it weren't for me, wouldn't you?" But Molly pretends she's in love with Chunky, and motivated by her love for David, tells Florence to please marry him and make him happy. When Rishka finds Lily weeping because Alexei loves Rishka more than her, Rishka is moved by compassion and vows to cure Alexei of his love for her. When Molly comes home, she overhears Chunky telling David to stop breaking Molly's heart and either marry her or get out. Rishka's new husband had been equally compassionate and had let her go to Alexei when she was weeping over him on their wedding night. And the cure that Rishka has planned for Alexei? To spare David any awkward feelings, Molly announces that she and Chunky are getting hitched. Likewise, Rishka goes home and gets back together with her new husband. And all's well that ends well. So in the end, both of our flappers had so much love in their hearts that they didn't hesitate to step aside and sacrifice their own happiness if it meant they could make someone else happy. But they didn't let it keep them down either. They both made a decision to not only accept, but to embrace the hand that life had dealt them. And in taking responsibility for their own happiness, they took control of their own destiny. So far, I have two main takeaways from watching these silent films. One is that romance movies in the 20s were very seldom just romances. They incorporated a lot of social commentary from different perspectives, both from those who wanted to push the envelope as far as they could and from those who would prefer that everything, especially women, stayed just the way they were. The second takeaway is that the flappers are, for the most part, good girls in disguise. They're just everyday girls wanting to have a little fun. But in the end, they want the same things that our good girls want. They aren't nearly as loose as appearances might have led people to believe, and they definitely mean no one any harm. Which is more than you can say for the archetype we'll be looking at in our next video, those sultry, seductive vixens known as vamps. Things are going to get really steamy, so be sure to subscribe and hit that bell notification button so you'll know when it comes up. In the meantime, you might enjoy these videos. Check them out and let me know what you think. And I hope you want to delve deeper by watching some of these movies in their entirety. Check the links in the description. See you next time. Until then, eat a cinnamon roll. They're good for you.